You are looking at one of the most audacious ideas ever drawn, a plan to dam the entire Mediterranean Sea. Not part of it, all of it, a single structure stretching 14 kilometers across the Strait of Gibraltar, and behind that dam, a continent-scale machine for generating power. The price tag? $800 billion. Here is the scale of what that actually means. $800 billion is more than the GDP of Switzerland. It is more than NASA has spent in its entire history, times 12. And it was all proposed by one Austrian engineer almost a century ago. His name was Herman Sörgel. In 1928, while the world was still rebuilding from one war and heading toward another, Sörgel published a plan. He called it Atlantropa, and it would have permanently altered the face of the Earth. Here is what the plan actually proposed. The Mediterranean Sea evaporates more water each year than rivers pour in, around 1,000 cubic kilometers of net annual water loss. The Atlantic keeps it full through the Strait of Gibraltar constantly. Sörgel's idea was simple and terrifying. Block the strait. Stop the inflow. Let the Mediterranean shrink deliberately by up to 200 meters. Do that and you drain an inland sea the size of Western Europe. Do that and you expose 660,000 square kilometers of new land. That is nearly twice the land area of Germany, risen from the seafloor. But Sörgel was not just thinking about land. He was thinking about power on a scale no engineer had ever attempted. As the Mediterranean dropped below Atlantic sea level, water would still flow through, but not freely, controlled through turbines. A dam at Gibraltar and a second dam at the Sicilian Channel, separating the western basin from the eastern. The head difference between ocean and sea would drive turbines continuously, day and night, indefinitely. Sörgel calculated a potential output of 50,000 megawatts from the Gibraltar Dam alone. That was roughly the total power consumption of all of Europe in 1930. One structure, one location, powering a continent. The foundation challenge would have been unlike anything ever attempted. The Strait of Gibraltar is not a simple channel. At its narrowest point, between Punta Paloma and Punta Ceres, it measures 14.3 kilometers across, but the depth drops to over 300 meters in the shipping lane corridor. Any dam structure would have to contend with the deepest turbulent marine environment on the planet. The seabed geology at Gibraltar is complex. You have ancient limestone on the Spanish side, relatively stable, but the Moroccan side sits on fleisch formations, layered sandstone and shale, far less predictable. Engineers working under Sörgel's framework proposed massive caisson foundations, precast reinforced concrete boxes, each one larger than a city block, sunk to the seabed and filled with aggregate, hundreds of them laid in sequence across 14 kilometers. Then a roadbed and turbine gallery built above. The concrete volume required would have exceeded 500 million cubic meters. For comparison, the Three Gorges Dam used 27 million cubic meters of concrete. The Gibraltar Dam would have required nearly 20 times that volume. Watch the numbers here, because they only get bigger. The steel reinforcement required an estimated 70 million metric tons. Global steel production in 1930 was about 100 million tons per year for the entire world. This one project would have consumed 70% of global steel output for multiple years. The workforce estimate Sörgel proposed was 1 million laborers, working continuously for decades. Construction time estimates range from 50 to 100 years. Not a generation, multiple generations. For this year of Seer essays again. Here is the crazy part. Sörgel actually attracted serious attention. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Atlantropa was not fringe science. It was discussed in German academic journals, architectural publications, and engineering conferences. The German Association of Architects gave it formal consideration in 1932. Sörgel held public exhibitions, drawing tens of thousands of visitors across Europe. He spent 30 years of his life advocating for it. He died in 1952, struck by a bicycle, still believing Atlantropa would eventually be built. Now here is what nobody saw coming. The physics of the plan, they actually worked. Modern oceanographic data confirms the Mediterranean does run a net evaporative deficit. Without Atlantic inflow, the sea would indeed drop within centuries by the magnitude Sörgel projected. The hydroelectric potential was real. A 200-meter head difference across a 14-kilometer dam, fitted with modern Kaplan turbines, could theoretically yield staggering continuous output. Present-day engineering estimates for a hypothetical Gibraltar dam put potential capacity at 50 to 100 gigawatts. That is 2 to 4 times the output of the Three Gorges Dam, the largest power station ever built. But the engineering of building it, that is where the reality fractures. The Strait of Gibraltar sees some of the busiest maritime traffic on Earth. Over 100,000 ships transited every year. A construction project across that corridor, spanning decades, would strangle global shipping at its most critical Atlantic-Mediterranean junction. The Suez Canal, which handles 12% of global trade, connects to the Mediterranean. Cutting off or severely restricting Gibraltar would reroute global trade around Africa, adding 7,000 kilometers of sailing distance to thousands of voyages per year. The economic disruption, before the first turbine turned, would be catastrophic. And the seismic problem. The Strait of Gibraltar sits directly on the boundary between the Eurasian plate and the African plate. This is not a quiet tectonic zone. The 1755 Lisbon earthquake, one of the most destructive in recorded European history, was generated in this exact region. A permanent dam structure across an active plate boundary, holding back a differential head of water, would face seismic stresses no engineered structure has ever been tested against. The dam would need to withstand a magnitude 8.5 event without failure, because if it failed, partially, the resulting surge into or out of the Mediterranean would be unimaginable. That is not a small engineering problem. That is a civilizational risk calculation. Now zoom out, because the environmental consequences were even more radical. Dropping the Mediterranean 200 meters does not just expose land, it radically changes the climate of surrounding regions. The Mediterranean Sea acts as a thermal buffer, moderating temperatures across southern Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Remove it, or reduce it, and you alter precipitation patterns across 3 continents. Historical climate modeling of a lower Mediterranean suggests southern Europe would become significantly drier. North Africa, already hyper-arid, could become even more hostile. The Sahara does not shrink with Atlantropa. Evidence suggests it may expand, and the exposed seabed, that much celebrated 660,000 square kilometers, would not be farmland. Ancient marine sediment, salt-loaded and mineral hostile, does not support agriculture. It would require decades of remediation, freshwater irrigation, organic treatment before crops could grow. The land yield was vastly overstated in Sörgel's original projections, and there was the human dimension, the one Sörgel almost entirely ignored. The Mediterranean coastline today is home to over 400 million people. Dropping sea level 200 meters does not just change geography. It destroys every coastal port city on Earth's most historically dense shoreline. Barcelona, Marseille, Genoa, Naples, Athens, Alexandria, Beirut, Tel Aviv, Istanbul, all of them sitting on coastlines that would recede by tens of kilometers. Every harbor, every naval installation, every coastal infrastructure rendered useless. The resettlement cost alone, relocating coastal populations, would dwarf the construction budget. In Sörgel's framing of North Africa as new land for European development, carries a colonial logic that modern ethics find deeply troubling. The plan presumed European authority over land that is African, without meaningful consultation of the people living there. 48 nations border or depend on the Mediterranean today. Not one was included in Atlantropa's core planning framework. Here is where the project stands today. Atlantropa was never built. After Sörgel's death in 1952, the idea lost its primary advocate. Post-war Europe focused on reconstruction, not continental reshaping. The European coal and steel community, formed in 1951, offered a different path to energy and economic integration. Atlantropa became a footnote in architectural history. It resurfaced briefly in academic circles in the 1990s, and again in the 2010s, as climate researchers modeled ancient Mediterranean sea level events for comparative data. But no government has ever formally proposed building it. No engineering firm has ever submitted a feasibility study for public tender. No international body has ever scheduled it for review. It exists only in papers, archives, and exhibition records, preserved in the Deutsches Museum in Munich. But the questions Sörgel raised, they have not gone away. Europe's energy dependency remains a defining geopolitical vulnerability. The 2022 natural gas crisis, triggered by the Russia-Ukraine war, cut European gas supply by over 40%. Renewable build-out is accelerating, but storage and baseload capacity remain critical gaps. A Gibraltar tidal or current energy installation, far smaller than Atlantropa, has been studied in recent decades. The Strait's water current reaches 5 knots, fast enough for significant underwater turbine arrays. Proposals for 10 to 20 gigawatt undersea turbine installations have circulated in EU energy research documents. Not a dam, not a sea level alteration, just turbines, harnessing what the ocean already does for free. That idea, a fraction of Sörgel's vision, is technically feasible with current engineering, and it would avoid every catastrophic consequence of the full Atlantropa plan. The legacy of the $800 billion dam is complicated. It was conceived by a man who genuinely believed it would unite Europe and Africa through shared infrastructure and shared energy. Sörgel saw Atlantropa as a peace project, an alternative to the wars consuming the continent. He was wrong about almost every environmental and human consequence. But he was right that energy infrastructure can reshape geopolitics. He was right that the Mediterranean holds extraordinary untapped energy potential. And he was right that engineering, at civilizational scale, could change the world. He just underestimated what else it would change along the way. Right now, the Strait of Gibraltar looks the same as it always has. 14 kilometers of open water. Ships crossing every few minutes. Atlantic water pouring east. Mediterranean holding its depth. No dam, no turbines, no fallen sea level. Just the strait, doing what it has done for 5 million years. But somewhere in the archives of the Deutsches Museum, the blueprints still exist. The calculations, the cross-sections, the scale drawings of a dam nobody built. What should we deconstruct next? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Built Impossible.